The other day I saw this antidepressant medication commercial. On the commercial they have a picture of a brain, sort of a scientific looking picture, and they're showing the brain producing these chemicals. And they're showing how when these chemicals are being produced, the person is happy, but in some people, the chemicals just aren't being produced, and then the person feels depressed. So it's almost as if out of nowhere, for no reason at all, these chemicals just stop working. And of course, the logical conclusion that flows from that is that you need to chemically fix the problem with, in this case, their particular medication. But I want to present a different side to the whole depression issue.
And I thought the best way to do this would be with an example. So here's a story about Alexander. Alexander lived in Germany in the 1940s. Alexander was in the business of printing children's books. If you were to ask him about his job, he would basically say he's the luckiest person in the world. What more could someone want? Not only is he contributing to the joy of all these children, but Alexander felt that he was contributing to the education of the next generation. He really felt like he was contributing. Now, if we were to zero in on Alexander's brain during this time, those same chemicals that are sort of blamed as a culprit in depression, Alexander wouldn't be liking those chemicals. Things were soon to change. Alexander was approached by a government agency about participating in a project. Alexander's job was going to be to find a special type of paper. For him, even though it wasn't children's books, the money was good and he thought he'd do it for a while. It'd be sort of a good change. So Alexander signed the contract and he went to work. He did find it a little bit curious, and he investigated a little bit further, and he discovered that there was a counterfeiting operation going on. The Nazis were attempting to counterfeit the US dollar in an attempt to fund their war effort. See, Alexander was against the war. He didn't want to make a big scene. On the other hand, he didn't want to participate. So he thought he could sort of stay out of it, but he found himself right entrenched within the whole war issue. But as Alexander discovered that he was actually participating, he became more and more depressed. He had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. He wanted to spend a lot of time by himself. He found himself dazing, daydreaming. He didn't have very much energy. If we were to sort of zoom in on Alexander's brain, we would find that his brain looks very much like that brain in the depression commercial that I alluded to in the beginning. His brain now wasn't producing these chemicals like serotonin. Now, what they don't mention in this commercial is that at the very moment your brain is in this sort of mode, this depression mode, different areas of the brain are activated and are communicating with each other, especially the creative part of your brain. Also, during this time, you're calling upon all your past memories. So you're sort of going into your long-term memory, and it's almost like it's an attempt to call on all your resources to try to find a solution for the problem that you're in. So what Alexander ended up doing is he just spent a lot of time brainstorming. He knew he didn't want to participate. He also knew he signed the contract, and if he didn't do the job, he could really get in trouble. After about 3 weeks, all of a sudden, the light went on. I know, he thought, I can create the special paper I learned about in school. This paper has all the qualities that I was contracted to make, but there's one little difference. This paper, when you go to print on it, the ink will smear just enough so that anyone could recognize that this money is in fact counterfeit, but it won't be obvious enough that I can be blamed for doing it intentionally. Would you believe at that exact moment that Alexander had his epiphany, at that precise moment, suddenly the endorphins, the serotonin, all these chemicals that his brain wasn't producing, now his brain was producing. This is very typical. When you are confused, when you lose direction, when something just doesn't seem right, your brain needs to stop and reevaluate what you're doing. It's not a time that you have a lot of energy or inspiration. No, it's a time that your brain is geared more towards reflection. Alexander did the right thing. He allowed himself the experience of the depression. He was not focused on getting rid of the depression. No, he was focused on finding a solution to the dilemma he found himself in. As it turned out, the counterfeiting scheme failed. Because of Alexander's action, countless lives were saved. But I want to get into the political side of depression. Any despot, any tyrant, they have grand schemes. But in order to implement their grand schemes, they need individuals participating. But there's one problem with their grand schemes. Human nature is such that we don't want to be controlled. When we are controlled, we feel a little bit uneasy. When things aren't right, we get depressed in order to find solutions, get back on track. So what does a despot do? The despot introduces a philosophy that your uneasiness, your anger, your depression is a disease. At the very moment you accept that premise, you will begin seeking treatment for the depression. You'll go to counselors, not to help you find better ways to overturn the despot. No, you'll ask the counselor how he can help you with your depression, as if the depression is the thing that needs to be resolved. So my advice to you, the individual, is real simple. Consider the possibility that your depression itself has a purpose. When you feel depressed, let yourself feel depressed. Don't try to treat your depression. Through the depression comes a new vision, and it's the new vision that's the source of your new inspiration. As long as you experience a depression, you'll get a new sense of direction. We need to have a way to sort of get back on track when we're off track, and depression is the perfect way to do it. The irony is that as long as you treat the depression, you can't get back on track, and if you can't get back on track, you can never get your inspiration, and so you'll always be depressed. And you don't have to make it too complicated. Depression speaks its own language. You just have to experience it. Try it out and see what happens.